So many times a series comes along that just sticks with you. Hell, even a character. My dad used to have a ton of Spider-Man comics growing up. Not too sure which era of comics those came from. These were from a time where comics were tackling deeper, more adult issues. During the golden age of comics, it should be that every issue your favorite hero would have to fight the next big bad, and there wasn't too much in terms of continuity. Over the years, the backstory started to develop and more of the characters became fleshed out, having to deal with more human issues like whose turn is it to take out the trash. To make a long story short, people started noticing these characters weren't aging as fast, and it was starting to get really hard to keep track of all the subplots. It was okay if you were an older fan, but as a new reader wanting to get in, it can be kind of hard figuring out where to start. Enter Marvel Ultimate Comics, an attempt to redefine each character for the modern day. Basically, a sexy update for each hero with new ideas, new storylines, and new origin stories. I actually first heard about the Ultimate Spider-Man series when Miles Morales first appeared. And don't get me wrong, because I don't really know much about comics, but I had heard about Miles and was interested enough to want to start his story from the very beginning. And as it turns out, in order to gain the full context of Miles Morales' origin story, I was going to have to start with the Ultimate Peter Parkers first. Okay, now this is starting off right in the middle of things with J. Jonah Jameson, and he's of course looking at photos of Spider-Man. He's talking to one of the people he works with. They're kind of going over the specifics of the photo, like who took it, and the gist of it here is that JJ is loving it, and this is like an opportunity for profit for him, which is like totally in line with his character. Right, Jameson is talking to Ben Urich, and they're just trying to come up with a new story, and Ben Urich, he is like an actual good guy trying to get the truth out there. So the events that lead up to Jameson getting his hands on this photo of Spider-Man, and this is meant to be like the first time he has ever seen him. And just putting this out there, I'm not too sure where this comic lines up. It was meant to be like a prologue to the actual story. Anyway, so this lady stole some shoes from this store and is trying to leave all smooth, and the shop owner comes out trying to stop her. And she goes, "Don't touch me. Get off me. I'm pregnant. I'm pregnant." Okay, I'll be the first to admit, maybe this guy got a little handsy, but this was like around the 2000s. These bystanders are watching, and Clarence Wilson comes out of the store, and if you don't know who this guy is, he's actually not a superhero or anything like that. Just some guy trying to stop what's going on here. The whole idea is that this is all just a big misunderstanding, and no way can this scrawny guy take a huge guy like Clarence Wilson. And this is where things actually start getting interesting, because we get introduced to the character of Danny Rand. Now, if that name does sound familiar, it's because this is actually Iron Fist, and he also doesn't like this chain of people grabbing onto each other. So before asking any more questions, he starts throwing hands with Clarence Wilson. And before things start escalating, in comes, this character wearing, red and blue tights, sucker punches Iron Fist, and, obviously this is Spider-Man. He takes out Clarence, and this is where the intern, snaps a photo. We go back to Jameson and Ben Urich, and they're discussing the details of the fight, kind of going over whether or not this Iron Fist guy is actually a mutant or not. Turns out, he just did a lot of push-ups, and he can now focus his energy into chi. He took it upon himself to go out and basically practice vigilantism, and actually was inspired by Spider-Man to do so. So it's kind of ironic that Spider-Man was the one who came out of nowhere and sucker punched him. Jameson is like, all right, this is gold. Let's run this story. Front page, Spider-Man's stinker sucker punch. And despite Ben Urich being a little hesitant, Jonah kind of insists that they will run the story, saying it's good art. But before he can go, Ben is like, wait, I have another statement. I was up about 7 stories from where the action took place. I heard the woman screaming and the shoe store clerk yelling for help. Spider-Man wrote this letter, and I love this because instead of the old school thought bubbles, this is the perfect way to get inside Peter Parker's head, like what he's thinking. Peter goes on to say, look guys, I know how crazy I look out here wearing my mask, but the truth is, if I were to reveal my identity, my loved ones would be scrutinized. On top of that, in danger for even being associated with him. And he goes on to say that he just is trying to help, and in that given moment he saw Iron Fist, and he was about to take out a civilian, and he thinks that cops might not be able to handle a guy with a glowing fist. So Spider-Man is just trying to be as open as possible here, saying, look, I just got these powers, I'm still learning how to use them. He doesn't really even know how to punch or kick, because he's still new to this. And he even admits, okay, I messed up, I kicked the wrong guy, but we got the shoplifter. You know, the last thing I'd want is for all this to be taken the wrong way, just on the off chance that there was no better story to run that day. And Jameson, he's kind of like taken aback, goes silent for a bit and says, "Alright, I'll think about it." And then he kind of smirks and goes, "Run it, it's good art." Chapter 1, Powerless. So Norman Osborn's in his lab with his colleague discussing Greek mythology and is going over the story of Arachne. Now, for those of you who don't know, the story goes, she was a bawling seamstress, and Athena started sipping that haterade, came down from the heavens, and destroyed all of Arachne's creations just for being dope. Arachne was devastated and hugged herself. Athena took pity on this poor girl and touched her on the forehead with a magic liquid and said, "You shall not die, Arachne. Instead, you shall be transformed and weave your web forever." Norman keeps going on. You can tell he's a little obsessed. This comic was written by Brian Michael Bendis and drawn by Mark Bagley. What Bendis kind of establishes here from the beginning is obvious. Norman is an intense guy. In this series, he's not actually like much of a scientist, more of like an insane businessman, but he's still like super like about his craft. You can see here he kind of just throws a spider away like it's nothing while talking about business while he's on the phone with one of his partners. And it's all about money for this guy, as long as we know who's in charge. But he does name drop the Oz formula here, which is something to note for right now. Norman's assistant freaks out and puts the spider back, but forgets to shut the lid. We cut to the Westwood Mall food court in Queens with Peter Parker doing some studying. He's getting some food thrown at him. Of course, it's Flash and his buddies, and everyone seems to be having a good time, except Peter. You know, Peter kind of just brushes it off, and actually, he gets caught staring at Mary Jane Watson right before getting hit by more food. Not sure about you guys, but this is reminding me of high school all over again. Anyway, Peter kind of just sits there and takes it, and I love the art in this scene. It really kind of gives a starker feel, like, man, this is something Peter just deals with on the daily, and it's not like there's anything he can do about it. I mean, did you see Homeboy's arm on the last page? Just then this taco comes flying through the air and knocks over Peter's Coke. This guy just does not catch a break. Just when all hope seems lost, that's when Uncle Ben comes out of nowhere to defuse the situation. He even plays wingman for my boy Peter a bit and gets MJ to come sit with him. But Uncle Ben can't save Peter at school, and he just constantly is getting bullied. Bendis really wants to drive this point across that Peter, he really just has no interest in fighting back or trying to get out of his situation. If anyone who has been bullied before knows, it's not like you can just get a teacher involved and it will just magically stop, because you're going to be like seen as a snitch or something like that. It seems hopeless to him. You know how it is at school, you don't want to be known as like the snitch, and after so long, Peter has just kind of come to accept that. It's like a learned helplessness type thing, you know, and this is just the way things are for him. And that's when we get introduced actually to the character of Harry Osborn. And at first, it seems like Harry's actually kind of cool. He tries to get Flash and his gang to stop, at least for a bit. His teacher sees everything happening and is like, "Don't let those guys pick on you, man." But, you know, Peter, it kind of just goes in one ear and out the other for him. That's when we see Peter and Harry talk, and Harry's like, "So it's cool if I come over later to do that biology, right?" And Peter says, "Yeah, it's cool, but if I do your homework, could you at least get Flash to ease up on me a bit?" And Harry's like, "Just forget about them, man. Roll it off." Peter's just like, "That's not gonna help me out now, man." And, Peter, he's right. I mean, what is Harry gonna do against like Flash and his gang? Like, it's just Peter versus all these dudes. Here we get to see some more aspects of Peter Parker's high school life. Obviously, he's never gonna be good at any sports either, and this just kind of pushes the point that this guy he's physically weak right now. This sort of video game, Peter basically put all his points into intelligence. If this were a chess match, Peter would be wiping the floor with these dudes. But, unfortunately, it is not a chess match. That is not the case here. Every day, Peter has to go to school and face the wrath of Flash Thompson. Later on, at the Parker residence, Aunt May and Uncle Ben talk about Peter's shyness. Aunt May thinks Peter being so closed off and quiet all the time is due to some sort of medical condition. She says they should look into it, but Uncle Ben says he just has a lot to think about. "I don't like it," says Aunt May. "He used to be such a happy little boy." Uncle Ben has a different approach, saying that's how Peter's dad used to be. The thing I like so much about Ultimate Uncle Ben is it's obvious how much he cares for Peter, and that he takes the time to highlight the positive things about his character. Uncle Ben knows Peter doesn't have it easy. I mean, he saw Peter at the mall getting dumped on by Flash, yet Instead of focusing on that, he manages to find an escape in learning, focusing on his studies, and he's able to find a sort of peace here at home with his aunt and uncle. Later that night, Harry and Peter hanging around downstairs. And again, Harry doesn't physically antagonize Peter. He's sort of good at the art of persuasion. He can chalk his way around a situation. Here he seems generally interested for a second. He can kind of respect Peter's dedication to his hobby. He even said it before. After high school, you're going places. And for a second there, Harry asks Peter, like, how did your parents die? And Peter says, in a car crash, and he kind of just, brushes it off, and they start looking at, like, this chalkboard, Peter's looking at it, and he's like, this is, like, what my dad was working on, and I kind of picked up where he left off, and this is, like, some sort of, like, old patent for an interesting molecular adhesive. And Harry just, leaves Peter hanging there, and he just gets, like, so lost in this stuff. And so Harry, like I said, it's interesting. He seems to be an alright guy, but then you start to feel sorry for him a bit. And what he has to go through in terms of his relationship with his father and his relationship with Flash and his gang. And it's like, he kind of wants to be like this good guy. There's all of these, sort of like bullies around him, like these dominating like personalities have rubbed off on him. Anyway, so the next day, Peter's on the field trip to Oscorp. The guide is going over how Oscorp is globally a major manufacturer of chemically engineered products. Now, I don't know about you, but none of this is sounding good. All seems to be well when suddenly, you guessed it, Peter is bitten by the spider and swings it off, landing on MJ. The classmates do their best to kill the massive spider. Peter is already on the floor, trying to hang on. MJ is there trying to help. Peter blacks out. Now, on the ride home, Peter is basically okay. This is sometime later, and we get to see Norman again. He's getting briefed on what happened earlier, and his team are going over the options because the thing is, like, that's going on with Oscar right now is like really illegal. But the thing is, this isn't Norman's first rodeo. This isn't ideal for him, but he has contingencies. His team are basically set up for this, and they're going to be getting ready for Peter's lawyers to come for them. So back at Peter's place, Peter's knocked out after the bite, and Aunt May is basically asking Uncle Ben, after like what happened on the field trip, doesn't he think that like they should be like suing Oscorp right now? And then Uncle Ben, he's like trying to be like level-headed about this whole thing, because in his mind he's like, okay, if we go and sue Oscorp, what's that gonna do for us right now? Like, we're just gonna get a couple $100, and then Peter's gonna lose his friend and Harry, and then we're just gonna go back to being normal. And he just like leaves it at that. So the next day at school, we see Peter going about his daily routine, and actually it looks like Flash and Kong are about to have their way with him again when Peter somehow senses Kong's kick before it happens. He turns around, like grabs his foot almost by instinct, and then just flips it over like a pancake. And everyone's just like freaking out. They're like, dude, holy, says Flash. A crowd gathers, and a teacher comes to break up the fight right before Peter faints again. So, like, I mean, just imagine if you're Peter's shoes, you're just fainting, like, almost every day on the daily. And not only that, you just, like, lifted this dude has to be, like, 300 pounds. I'm sorry, but that's what it looks like. Anyway, so Peter wakes up at the hospital later, and Aunt May is there. She's obviously freaked out, but Peter seems to be fine for the most part. The doctor asks Peter if he's been smoking weed. Yeah, doctor. That's what's causing kids to pass out in the middle of the hallways. Regardless, they're gonna do some blood work for Peter just to be on the safe side. The nurse is even like, you got some thick skin there. So it seems like his body is undergoing some changes. The nurse drops off the blood sample, and that's when a shady figure enters the scene, snatches it up, and leaves. Looks just like Jason Statham, but turns out it's actually one of Norman's thugs. Back at the lab, Norman is saying after the spider bite, Peter doesn't have much time left because the Oz formula is actually killing him. Instead of trying to find a cure or offer to help, Norman figures if Peter's gonna die anyway, maybe they can make it look like it was at least an accident. That way nothing can come back to Oscorp. Man, this is so messed up in comparison to what Uncle Ben was just saying, how he's just gonna leave it like it is. Anyways, and this part is actually kind of cool. You have Aunt May, who still thinks everything Peter has been going through lately is just some weird reaction to the spider bite. She's like, just eat the banana bread and all will be fine. Peter's strolling through the neighborhood lost in his book, and Jason Statham pulls up right behind him. Norman's on the phone with him, and he gives him the A-OK. Literally putting a hit out on one of his son's best friends, all in the name of greed. Jason Statham slams on the gas. Right before the car hits, Peter backflips right over it, and actually runs up to Jason and asks if he's okay after trying to run him over. Peter runs up, and Jason Statham grabs his gun and smiles, probably thinking he should have led with this. But before he can pull the trigger, Peter senses something is off and takes off, probably freaked out by all the weird shit that's been happening to him lately. And man, this is kinda dark. Jason Statham calls up Norman and says he missed his chance and that he can go home to finish the job. Peter is still just a kid, poor guy. Norman, hearing all this, says abort. He makes a decision that he needs to keep Peter alive to study him. This is what he's been building up to all of these years. He's literally just thinking about money. It's like consuming his brain. But Peter, he's rightfully freaked out, going over recent events in his mind, and he actually starts putting two and two together while he's like passed out in bed. The incident that happened at Oscorp, the jump over the car, the way he stopped Kong's kick, it's all connected, man. Aunt May calls Peter up from his room. Turns out, Peter skips school. He doesn't think that it's worth it having to put up with the embarrassment each day. The issue is, Peter hasn't learned, how to open up. He doesn't know how to put into words his emotions. And now, with a spider bite, he doesn't feel like he can tell anyone about what he's going through. It ends with Peter just going to his room, and he has one of those nights where you go to bed early and you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't go back to sleep. Anyways, he's sort of just sitting there thinking, something's hanging over him, he just can't shake it. He looks up at the ceiling, staring off into space like he normally does. And that's when he starts putting two and two together. Peter reaches out, putting his hand on the wall, and then another, and then a foot, and then he's climbing on the wall. He's all smiling up there, and he finally figured it out, that spider gave him powers. Alright, in this issue, we sort of get more of the same, and honestly, this is why I love Bendis' run on Spider-Man so much, because it all takes place while Peter is still in high school. A fully fleshed out story in school and being Spider-Man at the same time. I don't really think that we got to see any of that in the movies. Throughout this whole run, Peter's only about 15 years old, and at this point, I'm not sure most of you can kind of guess what happens here. We kind of see Peter, like I said, going through his everyday life while slowly figuring out how his powers work. He starts becoming more confident as well. He's not dumb. He's very aware of the changes that are going on in his body. So we see him actually starting to stand up to Flash, and even the coach is kind of impressed when he throws a ball right at his face while he's trying to mac on Mary Jane. Anyways, next thing you know, Peter and Flash are tussling after school when Peter says, "I don't want to fight you, Flash." And Flash is all, "I wouldn't want to fight me neither." Peter reaches out to stop Flash's punch and breaks his hand. Everyone is rightfully freaked out. Back at the Osborn residence, Kong goes to tell Harry about the incident while Norman just stands there, menacingly. Now, like I said, Norman, he's all about the money. As I said before, this guy is ruthless when it comes to getting his way. So much so, he comes up with this plan, basically get Peter back into his playing field. Because, remember, he doesn't want to kill him anymore. He wants to study him. And what he said before with the cigarette analogy, basically cigarette companies knew that tobacco was addictive and illegal, but by the time people realized what was going on, it was already too late. It didn't matter if it was illegal anymore. Everyone had already became addicted to it. So in Norman's eyes, whatever is happening to Peter, he wants to figure out some way to profit off of it. And this leads to him going to Harry to get to Peter. Back at home, Peter is having to deal with breaking Flash's hand. Uncle Ben gets off the phone with Flash's parents. It turns out after all those hard times Flash gave Peter, he still wants to sue him for breaking his hand. Ben and May start freaking out because they're already struggling enough as it is. This all leads to Peter saying, "You know what? I'm tired of being picked on. I'm tired of rolling with the punches. You guys made me a weakling." And, in Peter's eyes, it seems like even though he has this newfound strength and confidence, he still is cursed with that Parker luck. He can't catch a break. He overhears Aunt May talking about if they have enough money, and his situation still feels hopeless where is a 15-year-old kid gonna get $2,500? That night, Peter can't sleep and heads out for the night to let off some steam. The next morning, he heads downstairs and apologizes for his behavior last night. And Uncle Ben is like, just forget about it. Aunt May notices he doesn't have his glasses on. Here, we get to see Harry and Peter at Oscorp, and we get introduced to Ultimate Dr. Otto Octavius in this universe. The two kind of exchange formalities before Otto pulls out a syringe the size of Donkey Kong and stabs Peter with it. Before Harry can figure out what's going on, Peter is already long gone. Now, we cut back to Norman and his crew going over Peter's blood, and they can't believe what they are seeing. It seems, instead of killing Peter, the bite has actually made him healthier in some ways. Otto tells Norman he wants to study Peter more, finding his blood fascinating, but Norman sends him home. The thing is, at this point, Norman can't kill Peter because it would be too suspicious. At this point, with all the weird stuff that has been going on, people will put two and two together. The only way out, it seems, is to just put Peter on the back burner for now, until he can figure out what to do with him. The last thing he wants is for Oscar to be found out for conducting illegal experiments. So, what does Norman do? He asks his assistant to pull up his file to repeat the experiment. Okay guys, so just feeling I should get this out of the way. I wasn't too sure how to do the video, so bear with me. I'm hoping we're going at an okay pace, but we are just actually only coming up to the third issue right now. And we pick up right where we left off, and Norman is planning on using the Oz formula on himself. Only, instead of using spider DNA in line with the Oz formula, Norman plans on using his own DNA and injecting himself with it. And in his mind, his reasoning is like, if a small spider could give Peter Parker these insane powers, and that spider was injected with the Oz formula, just imagine what it would do in Norman's eyes, since it would just make him even stronger than he is, faster, smarter, all that stuff. And even his henchmen are like, do you seriously want to experiment on yourself? And Norman is just like, we're glad we're on the same page. We then pick up with Peter and MJ. And I did a bit of research before this issue, because if you ever see the Tobey Maguire Sam Raimi films, this is more or less the same origin story. We even have Crusher Hogan here, and the idea is they're inviting people up onto the stage to challenge him, but you have to be 21 years old. And so what ends up happening is, this gives Peter an idea, and he decides he wants to compete for the money. And I'm honestly not too sure how many of you saw that one coming, but this came out before the movie. Anyway, Peter puts together a costume at home, and the next day goes back over to the wrestling match, jumps on stage, and just lifts up the Crusher like it's nothing, and just slams him on the ground. And the show is a hit. Like, everybody is just loving it, and really, like, no one can actually, like, believe what they're seeing. The announcer asks Peter to take off his mask, but he just ignores him and goes straight for the cash. He even asks Crusher if he's okay before leaving, because for Peter, this seems like an okay gig, pretty low effort, high reward sort of thing, but really he figures this is a great way to pay off his debt to Flash. He takes the money home, and he sneaks it under the door, pretending that someone else left it. Like someone else from like the school maybe left it for Uncle Ben and Aunt May to find, and sort of like a goodwill gesture. Because even though Peter, he has been a kind of a dick lately. He pretty much is a new dick. So he still has some history of being a good kid, at least for now. And what we come to see here is, it seems like things are actually going pretty good for Peter Parker, finally. After all, like, the freaky stuff that happened, things seem to be, like, kind of, settling. Remember, other than almost getting run over, he doesn't really have any idea that Norman has been out to get him. And on top of that, we know that Norman isn't trying to kill him anymore at this point. So Peter, he's kind of just, he's going through his life, and he has these newfound powers, and these situations start popping up throughout his life where he starts wanting to, like, take advantage of him. And now that Mary is actually, like, interested in him, he's, like, blowing her off, and he figures he can use these powers to actually get back at Flash, because now that his hand's broken, there's an open spot on the team. And when the coach asks him to join, Peter immediately, he says yes, and he just starts popping off, and he's like winning games and stuff. We cut back where he's making his money, and this is kind of like exactly where, and this is the part where I think it's exactly like the Sam Raimi movies, because the announcer goes up to Peter and he asks him, like, what's your name? And then Peter's like, the Human Spider. And the announcer's like, okay, that's lame. No, you're gonna be like the Amazing Spider-Man, and so like you're gonna be the Spectacular Spider-Man. So like, and Peter, he's starting to fall into this routine where, like, he's going and he's winning all this money, he's using his powers, and, he's like beating all these guys, like, on the basketball team, and, they're all working out, and he just kind of, just came in and just started, like, beating all of them and stuff. But anyways, so for a moment, it actually looks like Peter could be turning into a supervillain here. You know, like the choices that he's making. If he doesn't stop soon, you know, where would you see him like ending up here? He's starting to talk back to everyone, and the guys backstage, you know, they're starting to prod him to like take off his mask, you know, reveal his identity. And Peter's just like, that's never gonna happen, you know, like this is the way things have to be, you know. And then like nevertheless, you know, the announcer says, okay, fine, but next time you show up, be wearing this. And this is kind of like the start of the suit, you know. We see Peter, he's trying to get into like this routine where he figures like he can trick Aunt May and Uncle Ben into thinking that like these people are like paying off for like, you know, Flash's debt. You know, it's everything is working out for him. It's basically like the point that I think Bendis is trying to get across here. And the implication here is like, you know, he's sort of making himself look good by saying this money is, you know, coming from the school. But for the most part, after all the crazy things that have happened, Peter is starting to get a grasp of his powers, and things are almost better than before. While all this is going on, we see Harry Osborn walking in on Norman right in the middle of the Oz procedure with Doc Ock. Norman is just like, get him out of here. And before Harry can get any answers, he's escorted out. But he's horrified after seeing all the mad scientist going down with Doc Ock and his dad. The door starts closing, and all you can hear is just Norman screaming in the other room. But that is the end of the video, guys. I wanted to do this video mainly for my friends to try and get them caught up with the Ultimate Spider-Man. I was trying to cover more of the stories, but bear with me while I try to figure out what the best way to do this is. Like, I was trying to put this out fast, but that is like almost never the case with my videos. But anyways, if you liked it, just leave a comment, tell me what your favorite part was. And my name is The Driver. Watch my other videos. Just then, this taco comes flying through the air and knocks over. Just then, this taco comes